Well, today on The Real Story, U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal sailed to victory Tuesday night, winning a third term in the U.S. Senate. His opponent, Republican Leora Levy, conceding that race. But the battle for control in Congress is not over yet, and the stakes are high. This morning, Senator Richard Blumenthal joins us once again in studio to give us his take on the power struggle and what it means for the work our political leaders hope to do in Washington. And there's a lot to break down between the push and pull in Washington to what happened in our Connecticut towns and cities, the balance of power in our own state legislature, and of course, the position of chief executive of the state, governor. This morning, we break it all down with Quinnipiac University professor Wes Renfro. It's all today on The Real Story. Good morning, and thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Jen Bernstein. Coming off the heels of an intense midterm election, party power in U.S. Congress still hanging in the balance as Connecticut Democrats celebrate some major victories here in our state.
The American people want us to work together. They want us to get things done. They want results. That's going to be overwhelmingly my priority, no matter who is in control of the United States Senate. I'd like to be the Democrat, but if not, I'm going to do my job for the people of Connecticut.
U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal right there on the night that he won one of those key races, a seat in the U.S. Senate. Incumbent Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal, who has been a leader in Connecticut for decades and held the Senate seat for 2 6-year terms, sought re-election and successfully saved his spot on Capitol Hill. His victory, one of the first called here in Connecticut on election night, if not the first. Republican challenger Leora Levy, endorsed by Donald Trump, conceded a few hours later. After hearing the news, the senator spoke passionately about his commitment to working across the aisle as we continue to watch the changing balance of power in Congress. And this morning, U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal joins us in studio once again. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. I know you must be tired after, all the time campaigning and everything like that, but so glad you're here because this story isn't done yet. You have victory in this seat, but control of Congress still remains in the balance. But let's talk about your victory first. Your reaction the night you found out you won, because it was, I think, 8:01, the Associated Press called your race.
I was thrilled and surprised that the results were known literally almost as I was leaving the last polling place where I was saying hi to voters and greeting them. And I got in my car and was called at about 8:01 or 8:03 saying the AP had called the race. And they can do magic things with algorithms and exit polling.
Yeah, a lot of people were curious on how the Associated Press could call that race without the returns from the Secretary of the State's office coming in. We're going to talk to Quinnipiac University professor Wes Renfro, and that is one of the things that we're going to break down with him to see how that happens. Regardless, the numbers when they came in showed exactly that you had won that race fair and square, double-digit lead. The polls were correct on what you had been seeing.
The final margin was about close to 15%, which was really enormously and emotionally gratifying for me because, in effect, the voters of Connecticut were saying, we think you're doing okay. And I do my own polls every weekend. I come home every weekend. I'm all around the state listening to people, trying to work for them, getting issues and cases where I can help them. But after a while, there's a bond, which is more than just numbers or visits. It's the talking that we do back and forth, and so this result was just really very powerful for me personally.
Talk about the concession phone call that you got from Leora Levy. It was a couple hours later. What was that like?
Pretty short, curt, and matter of fact, she wished me Godspeed in the 6 years ahead.
Yeah, another 6-year term. You've already served 2 of them, and there's a lot of work still to be done. I guess I didn't realize this, but on Monday, tomorrow, you're already going back to Washington, right, to start the job again. What's this week look like for
Well,
Congress?
we have a lot to do. First of all, we're going to do a marriage equality bill, which I have strongly advocated and helped to lead, so that there's no uncertainty whatsoever about the right of people to marry someone they love, of the same sex or not, and that racial interracial marriages are protected as well. We also have to do the defense bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, which provides for helicopters and submarines and joint strike fighters. We make a lot of those
in Connecticut.
And there are other legislative agenda items, such as judgeships that we have to fill. So we have a busy couple of months ahead until the new Congress comes to Washington, and it is the new Congress where the balance of power is still somewhat uncertain.
Is there a lot of pressure, I would assume, to get things done during this lame duck session, right? Because you have control of Congress, you have the presidency, but that is looking like could be very different come January.
There's a lot of pressure to get things done simply because there's a lot to get done.
Sure.
And we have an obligation to do it regardless of who's in control. The defense budget, obviously, as a matter of national security, has to be done. Marriage equality is on people's minds because of the Supreme Court's decision in the Dobbs case, which overturned Roe v. Wade reprehensibly and unconscionably, and I am leading the effort to restore those rights that are so important to women. Fundamental health care decision probably will not be done, but protecting marriage equality could be, and I think we have the votes to protect marriage equality in the Respect for Marriage Act. It's so important that we not roll back that progress.
I was going to ask you about abortion. So even though we could be looking at a Republican House, there's still not necessarily a push to get abortion done before the new Congress?
We voted once,
Yep.
and unfortunately not a single Republican, not one, voted for the Women's Health Protection Act, which I wrote and helped to lead 10 years ago. In the time since then, almost every Democrat, 49 of us, voted for it when it was on the floor just a couple of months ago. And I'm still working on trying to persuade my Republican colleagues to join us. I hope maybe they will now that the elections are done. But whether we'll have enough time to deal with it in this Congress, I don't know. But I'm going to continue the fight to restore women's health care rights because I really trust women to make these decisions. I don't want government or politicians interfering in that right for women.
Is there a compromise in your bill that could be struck? I mean, you've worked with senators before. We know you've worked with Senator Lindsey Graham a couple times this year. Is there something, a balance that you can find before the end of this Congress?
I'm hoping that maybe there is some kind of solution here that Republicans can join, but not that compromises this fundamental right. And all we're doing in the Marriage Equality Act is making sure that people understand they have those rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution. The same should be true of women's health care. The Roe decision, as incorporated in the Marriage Equality Act, as incorporated in the Women's Health Protection Act, and similar to our state law that provides those same rights, would simply incorporate those guarantees of the Constitution.
All right, let's talk about balance in the Senate right now, because we might not know until December. In full transparency here, we are taping this interview on Thursday, so there are things that could change before Sunday when you're watching this right now. But as of right now, we still have 3 states that we don't know who is the winner, and it could go either way in several of those. So what does that look like for you?
Well, I think, Jen, the threats that we've seen from the Republican leadership in the House, if they gain control there,
Which it's looking like could be a very real possibility at this point.
the odds are that Republicans will have control in the House, and what they've said is that they are going to shut down the government, literally, unless Democrats agree to cut Social Security and Medicare. That is absolutely intolerable from my standpoint, and I will fight it because the threat to undermine this fundamental insurance program, whether it's for Social Security or Medicare, is beyond the pale for me. And I think also people should realize that there are tax cuts that we could make that would benefit the middle class and working families. The child tax credit that was in effect until Republicans blocked its renewal. And then, of course, consumer protection, which has been kind of my bread and butter. Why not give consumers rebates out of the gargantuan excess profits that oil companies are making, quadruple what they did in the same quarter last year. $4 trillion is what they're set to make this year. That's nearly 4 or 5 times the defense budget. So I want to see consumers protected. I want to cut the costs of living here in Connecticut and around the country, tax cuts for the middle class and working families, not for the millionaires and billionaires, as did the Trump tax cuts. And I think all of it is doable if we can reach some kind of compromise working together. And overridingly, as I said the night of my election victory, I want to reach across the aisle and bring together colleagues who should be healing divisions, not hurling insults.
Do you feel like what we saw with a lot of the Trump-endorsed candidates not necessarily making it in office across the country? Some of them did, of course, but there were some that were refuted. Do you feel like that could temper down the temperature in Congress among Republicans and Democrats in some ways?
I think that's a great question, because this vote really was against the insurrectionists, against violent extremism, against the Trump-inspired threats to our democracy, the election deniers. Most of the Secretary of State candidates around the country who were election deniers lost. The American people want us to come together without the continuation of this threat of violence or election denial. And I think that could well temper or maybe give courage to some of my Republican colleagues who are on the side of our working together more than we have before. My hand is out, and I've worked with Lindsey Graham on, for example, standing up for Ukraine, more arms, more humanitarian assistance, more sanctions against Russia. I've worked with Jerry Moran on the PAC Act that will aid veterans who've suffered from exposure to toxic chemicals on the battlefield, the burn pits. They'll now receive care and benefits. We want to make sure that act is implemented. We'll work together in that way. So I think there is a pattern of bipartisan cooperation that maybe we can expand.
What do you think? I mean, for you, I would assume best case scenario is you Democrats get both chambers. But if it goes where the Senate's Democrat and the House is Republican, how does that change your workflow? Will you all be able to get anything through? I mean, I know President Biden will be able to get like judge recommendations through, judge endorsements, but what else could you do?
Judicial nominations are very important.
Sure.
Democratic-controlled Senate will enable President Biden to continue diversifying the federal courts. More of the very diverse candidates that he's proposed, and I think that will be important. But one way or the other, we're going to continue, for example, bipartisan work on protecting kids on the internet. I have a bill that I wrote along with Marsha Blackburn, Republican of Tennessee, that will protect kids from some of the abusive content that's driven to them by big tech companies, the black box algorithms that promote eating disorders and bullying and even suicidal content. We want to give protections to parents and to kids, safeguards, tools to avoid that kind of abusive content. And we can continue to work together. So I think my workflow is going to be pretty heavy one way or the other.
Sure. Okay, yeah, online, a scary place sometimes, that's for sure. U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal once again in our studio. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck in Washington tomorrow.
Thanks.
All right, next up, Quinnipiac University professor Wes Renfro sitting down with me to talk everything with election night and what comes next. The balance of power in Congress, the close races, the votes that surprised us, and more.